Hey, what is going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. Hope you are doing well today, and I hope your Swift development skills are getting better with each day that you practice. Now, in today's video, I wanted to go over a couple of the more advanced techniques that I utilize to make my programming job a lot easier. So, as a lot of you are probably aware, when we are trying to lay out our views programmatically, things can become a little bit tedious. So in today's video, we'll see how we can solve that problem really easily. But before we get into that, let me give you a demo as to the application we're going to be building out for today's video. And so here we have in the iPhone X simulator, the profile screen that belongs to the Tinder application that I may or may not use every other day. So we have this application with a somewhat complicated layout on the top portion of this screen here, and at the very top left we have a bigger image that is kind of the size of twice of these thumbnails on the right side, and then we have this bottom row at the very bottom here with these three images, which, if you think about it, it's not too difficult to build out. But as you can imagine, typing out all of the auto layout constraint code can typically become a little bit tedious and frustrating as a programmer to actually do. So I'm going to show you how to create some extensions just to make our jobs go by a lot faster. So let's dive into Xcode and see exactly how we can do this. Alright, so here we are inside of Xcode. I have a brand new single view application created called Easy Anchors LBTA. We have a view controller class that does absolutely nothing inside of the view.load. If you run this bit of code, you get nothing but a white screen inside of your simulator. Alright, so that's pretty much the basic setup that we have here. And the way I want to actually illustrate how to create these advanced extensions for auto layout is to actually create some kind of view inside of view.load to span the entire view of our simulator. So the way I'm going to do that is to first create some kind of red view, and let's just instantiate it with the UI view constructor of empty. And let's see, first property to set is the background color equals to .red. And then the next thing you have to do is to actually add this view into your view controller with add subview. And let's just add in this red view. Now, obviously, because we haven't specified a frame or the auto layout constraints, when you run this bit of code, you're not going to see your red view anywhere. So why don't we go ahead and use some auto layout? And here's where I'm going to go through the tedious process of setting up all of our constraints, as well as the property of red view translates auto resizing mask into constraints. We actually have to set this property to false every time. And as a lot of you are probably aware, this enables auto layout. And now I want to fill up the entire simulator with my red view. And I'm going to use the top anchor, which is up there, the leading, which is the left, and then the trailing anchor, which is the right, and then the bottom, which is obviously the bottom. So let's do the red view first, or the top anchor first rather, with a top anchor constraint equal to some kind of anchor. This is going to use the views top anchor like that, and then finally red view dot leading anchor constraint, and you'll see that this is quite tedious and repetitive after a while, but nonetheless we just have to do it. And trailing anchor constraint to the, let's see, views trailing anchor like that, and then next we say red view dot bottom anchor constrained to yet again the views bottom anchor like that. Alright, so you think you're kind of done, right? But because we are inside of code, we have to activate these constraints with is active equals to true, and I'm just going to copy and paste that, and that. You can use NS layout activate constraints if you wanted to, but that's how I'm going to set up my views inside of view.load. And the moment I run this application, you should be able to see the red view completely fill up the entire screen. Alright, so that's the basic approach that we want to use to set up our views in auto layout, and I would like to make this entire call using just one function. Alright, so how do I collapse this entire bit of code? Well, I'm going to create an extension on UI view, which is what red view is an instance of. So let's say extension on UI view down here, and let's create this extension function or method, whatever you want to call it, and let's name it anchor like that. So whenever you have an extension method on a class, your instances, let's say red view, where are we? Red view, we can call anchor, which is this bottom method over there. So the question now is, what exactly do we want to do with this anchor method? Well, I'm going to include all these calls in this simple method over here. And let's see, how do we want to do this first? Well, why don't we automatically call translates auto resizing mask into constraints equals to false every time we call this anchor method. All right, so now I want to actually punch in these parameters as the first 4 parameters of this anchor method. So what I mean is I want to set something like top as my NS layout axis, see y-axis anchor, and then I'll punch in leading as NS layout x-axis anchor, and then the bottom, which is going to be the NS layout y-axis anchor, and the trailing, which is the right anchor, to be NS layout x-axis anchor, like that. All right, so with those 4 parameters, what we can do is every time we call this method, we'll just anchor this entire view's left, top, or trailing and bottom to these anchors as those parameters. So in other words, I'll say top anchor, and then I will constrain it just like what we did previously with the top, like that, and we'll activate it with equals to true, and then we just go through this dance of constraining all these anchors together with leading, like that. I believe this is going to have to be called leading anchor instead, is active equals to true. Finally, we say bottom anchor dot bottom anchor dot constraint bottom from the parameter list above, active equals to true, and then trailing anchor constraint, let's see, equal to the trailing anchor that is this guy over here, and finally specify that last property of is active equals to true. All right, so with all that kind of established inside of my method right there, I can now eliminate all of these calls to just be commented out, replace this anchor method call like that with those 4 anchors that belong to the view's top, leading, trailing, and bottom. So let's just say we want to use the safe area guide instead. So safe area layout guide dot top anchor. Let's use the views leading, views safe area guide bottom instead, view dot, I don't know, trailing anchor, and try to run this code now, and you'll see that the red view should fill up this entire thing of our application, but instead of filling up the top and bottom, we've used the safe area layout guide. So that's kind of where the edges are for the top, and then the bottom over there. Okay, so now that you can kind of see how we've reduced a lot of code by using this one anchor call, let's try to establish some way to introduce some padding for our red view, let's say on the left side and also on the right side. And the way I'm going to do that is to modify my anchor method inside of the extension by including a final parameter at the very end. And I'm going to, let's see, call this padding like that. And I will allow this guy to be of type UI edge insets. And by default, I'm just going to give it a value of .0, which means that the top, left, right, and bottom are all going to be the values of 0. Okay, so the way I'm going to use this padding variable, this parameter, is to include it inside of this constraint call. And basically all of these anchor calls, they come with another method called using this constant guy over there. So let's just type it out with constant of padding.top like that. And then for leading, you pretty much do the same thing with padding.left. And the tricky part about the bottom and trailing is that you have to use the negative value. So what I mean is constant like so, padding.bottom. You want to make sure you hit the negative sign, which is showing up there. And finally, for the trailing, you do the same thing of constant of negative padding dot right, like that. All right, so let's get rid of the placeholder method call right there. And because we've defaulted this padding parameter to be .0, you don't actually have to fix this with anything. But if you wanted to include left of, let's say, 16 and right of 16, all you have to do is punch in the last parameter of padding like that and say .init with the top of 0, left of 16, bottom of 0, and the right of 16. So running this, you'll introduce some padding for the views that you are anchoring inside of your view controller. All right, so that's exactly what we have. If you wanted to add top and bottom padding, you can just fill in these values here and there as well. Okay, so good stuff. And now what I really want to do is to actually address the implementation of this UI. And I want to anchor this view that's all the way on the top right somehow. And let's just say for this example's sake that the width and height of this view is 100 by 100. Well, I'm going to actually modify this anchoring method again to include another parameter at the very end called size. And this will be of type CG size like that. And I will have a default value of .0 as well for this size parameter. And this means that your size has a width and height of 0 as default. All right, so how am I going to use this size parameter inside of this method? Well, the way I'm going to do that is to check if size.width equals not equals 0. That means I'm actually passing something as this size parameter. I'm going to say width anchor.constraint equal to some kind of constant. And this constant is going to be the size.width like that. And remember, you always have to activate your constraints with the isActive property. And just like the size, we will check the height. If it's not equal to 0, we'll say height anchor.constraint equal to the size.height, and isActive equals to true, like that. Okay, so you can build your project, you can run it again, you'll get your view with the padding like what we had before. And now what you have to do is for this anchor method, you can say size at the very end and specify .init for your CG size class, and you can give it 100 and 100 and attempt to run this bit of code. But because your constraints are kind of contradicting each other, you will get this huge warning at the bottom telling you that the height of 100 is conflicting with the entire height of 812 that you specified with the top. Let's see, top and the bottom, which is stretching all the way up and down like that. And then the height of 100 pretty much is conflicting with it. So that's the problem that we actually have to fix. And the way that you do this is to make your anchors that you pass into this huge anchor method, you want to actually make them optional. So I'm going to specify the top, the leading as optional like that, the bottom optional, and the trailing as optional as well. So the one thing that's kind of annoying when you do this is that you actually have to unwrap your top anchor with either the force unwrap like that, but that's not really that safe. So I'm going to say if let top equals top, and let's just cut and paste that in there. So we're basically checking if all of these parameters that you're passing in is actually something, and then we will actually perform the anchoring. So if leading is that, we'll just cut that in there. And why don't I do this 2 more times? If let bottom equals bottom, and let's say if let trailing equals trailing, and then we will move this inside of that method there, move this inside of the last one there, and we should be okay. All right, so the question is, what does this allow us to do? Well, I would like to place my view in the top right corner over there right now, and the way I will do that is to comment out that, and while I'm here, I'll just blow away all these commented out code or lines of code, and let's say red view anchor, and I'll use the bottom one that includes the size. And so because these parameters are now optional, I don't have to pass in anything if I don't want to. So for the top, I will use the views savior guide dot top. The leading, because that's the left, I'll use nil. Bottom is nil as well. Trailing will be the views, and let's just use the safe area guide dot trailing anchor. And the padding, we will say dot init. The top, again, we'll use 0 or whatever you want. Left, bottom is 0. The right, I'll use a padding of 12 or 16. Doesn't really matter. Let's use init of width and height of 100 and 100. So this is going to place my red view so that the top of it is anchored to the right side, which is, or the top is at the top, the trailing is on the trailing of the view, which is the right side of the view, and then the width and height is 100 like that. Okay, so good job. I hope you're still with me, but this anchoring method allows us to make our auto layout task much easier without having to fiddle around with too much of the constraints that we type out manually. And most of the time you can mess up because it's really easy to not activate something or forget a call. All right, so where do we want to go from here? Well, why don't I show you how to place this view in the middle right there, right below the red view. And I'm going to construct a blue view, call it blue or UI view, blue view dot background color equals dot blue. All right, so you actually have to add all of these views like that before you perform the auto layout constraint code. And you can do this, or you can use a red view, comma blue view, use a for each loop instead, which is what I prefer to use. And we'll use view.add subview of $0, which represents one of your items inside of your array. So that means we can eliminate that, and that makes your code a lot cleaner in the long run. And finally, let's use the blue view and anchor it inside of our view somehow. And again, I want to anchor it right there underneath the top right view. So let's use this call again, and the top anchor is going to be the bottom of that. So I will say red view dot bottom anchor. The leading, I'm going to use nil. The bottom is going to be nil. The trailing is going to be the red view's trailing, so pretty much the red view's trailing on the right side. So let's say red view dot trailing, and the padding I am going to use either .0. Let's see what that will give us. And this you need to initialize with, let's say 100 and 100 yet again. So obviously there are some drawbacks to this approach, and I'll address them as we go along here. And basically here is what we have. If we wanted to punch in some space above the blue, we can use the padding of .init and the top, let's say 12. The rest of these values will just use the value of 0, and that'll introduce a little bit of gap and some breathing room between our elements inside of our UI, which is always nice to have. Okay, so the last final view that I would like to draw out is this larger view on the left, so this top left image. And I'm going to use a green view this time, so red, blue, and green. One of my favorite colors of the spectrum, let's see, green view dot background color equals dot green. And the nice thing about this array for each loop is that you can just include your view directly in your array, and this loop takes care of the subview adding for you. So really easy to do. Now the green view is going to be on the left side like that. So let me try to anchor this with our anchor call, and I don't think I need the size, so I'm just going to make this call over here. So anchor top is going to be the view's top, or even, let's see, red view dot top anchor. Leading is views safe area guy dot leading anchor. The bottom is the bottom of this view, so what I'm going to use is the blue view's bottom. So blue view dot bottom anchor, the trailing, so the trailing is actually the right anchor, and the trailing is going to be over there. So this we will try to use red view dot leading anchor. So the trailing anchor is going to be right there. It's going to be trailed at the red's leading view, which is the left of the red view. So that's kind of how you can think of it. And finally, I think I need a padding value of .init. Let's see, where are you? There you are right there. Let's see, 0 for the top, left I'm going to use 12, bottom 0, and right of 12. So hopefully my green view will be placed to the left of the red and blue and have the correct width and height. And that's pretty much how you would construct your auto layout for this type of UI right there. And so let me address some of the drawbacks to this approach right now. And one of the kind of major issues with your layout is that, let's say you want to increase your red view's width or height by some kind of value, right? you want the layout to automatically readjust itself so that the green view isn't too big or large, and the blue view should match the size of the red view. So the way you would do this is to actually configure your red view so that you don't hard code the height value to 100. So I'm going to change the height to 0 and go back to the good old constraint code of, let's see, height anchor dot constraint, and I'll constrain it equal to some kind of dimension. Now you can use either this multiplier call, which is totally valid, or just use this equal to call. So this is going to say red view dot width anchor, and make sure to activate your constraints like that. And so again, if you, let's say, modify the width to 50 now, the red view is going to have its height changed to 50 as well, because that's the way the constraints are currently working. And you can kind of see that your view seems to be adjusting itself, but not all that perfectly. So how do you go about fixing this? Well, the blue view actually needs to be configured so that its width and height is also matching exactly what the red view is. So let's change the blue view's size parameters over here to actually not use any constant width and height anchors at all. So let's remove that. So I'm going to say blue view dot width anchor constrained to some kind of dimension, and let's use red view's width anchor like that is active equals to true. And for this last, the height anchor, you can constrain it to a couple of different things for it to work. I'm going to say blue views dot height anchor and say is active equals to true. And running this code again, a lot or most of the views inside of your UI is pretty much now dependent on the 50 value of this width guy. So one thing that's not working is this really needs to be constrained to the height like that. And let me change this to 125 instead. So 125, and now because I've changed the width of the red view, everything is going to appear a lot larger. So the width and height of the blue view is just matching exactly what is the red view. Okay, so hopefully you guys are still with me. The last thing I want to talk about is that you can actually be very creative with the way you write your extensions so that you actually compose them together. So what I mean is that, let's say I want to actually eliminate this call right here of width and height and actually all these isActive calls. I can include another extension methods. Down here, let's just say function anchor. And because the width and height really belongs to a size, I'm going to anchor size to some kind of view like that. And let's just make these two calls in here instead. So with anchor dot constrain equal to view dot width anchor, I believe that's what we need to do. Activate that guy, height anchor dot constraint equal to, let's see, view height anchor is active equals to true. And now we can just call anchor size on blue view. So what I mean is view, or blue view, anchor size to some kind of view, and I'm going to anchor the size to exactly the red view like that. And that means I can remove those two method calls and just combine that into one very easy to make method call called anchor size. And that's exactly what we have up there. If you wanted to get very, very creative with your extensions down below, let's say I want to very easily fill up the entire screen with some kind of method. So, typically I might want to create something called fill super view like that. And on a view, you have this property called super view, which is kind of the parent view that contains it. So you can make this call. And basically what you want to do is to say, let's see, anchor this guy right here. You can just say super view dot top anchor super view. See, super view dot leading, super view dot bottom anchor, and then super view dot trailing anchor like that. So this is going to fill up the entire screen. Let me try to illustrate that by going down here and say, let's see, I don't know, purple view, I think that's a color. Purple view equals UI view, and purple view background color equals dot purple. and view.add subview of purple view, and you just want to call purple view.fill super view. You will fill the entire view controller's view with this purple view. Hopefully it should work, and you see that the purple view magically appears like that. Okay, so that's going to wrap it up for today's video on how to write out these helper and convenience methods to make our lives a lot easier in terms of dealing with auto layout using the programmatic approach. Now, there are a couple of other things that I wanted to talk about in today's video, but I think I'll save that for next time. And remember, if you want to download the source code for today's project, you can find the link in the description below. If you enjoyed today's video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and also consider subscribing to the channel. That's going to be it for me today. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.